If you want to lose weight, you could cut your arm off, but obviously that wouldn't make your life better. So the goal can't be to have less pounds, but it's also true, on the other hand, that having less pounds or less bulk or less of you is often a good thing for your health. So I just would caution to say that the goal is better health, and that often includes weight loss.
Welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast, sponsored by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
I'm your host, Hilda Labrada Gore. This is episode 112, and my guest is Dr. Tom Cowan. Tom is well known as a holistic physician in private practice in San Francisco, and also as the author of The Fourfold Path to Healing and the co-author of the Nourishing Traditions book of baby and childcare. He is a popular speaker at Wise Traditions conferences and everywhere he goes, really, and today you'll know why. He is straightforward and honest, a no-nonsense kind of guy, and he gives us tips about how to lose weight, but also actually why weight loss shouldn't be our primary goal when it comes to our health. So let's forget about the numbers today and focus on getting healthy with Dr. Tom Cowan. He gives us practical tips today on the importance of movement and intermittent fasting. Before we get into the conversation, we want to thank our sponsors. The Wise Traditions podcast is supported in part by the Weston A. Price Foundation, dedicated to restoring nutrient-dense foods to the diet through education, research, and activism. Visit westonaprice.org. And listeners like you, your support helps keep this show on the air. Thanks for your donations, your feedback, and for just being a part of this community. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Tom.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on your show again.
Well, it's a time of year when everyone's thinking about resolutions and weight loss. What has your experience been with patients that have come to see you with that concern?
I would say that sometimes that's their concern, although I would say that most of the time their primary concern is to get healthier. And I would also say that I don't think that one should ever think about weight loss out of the context of getting healthier. I mean, just as a stupid example, if you want to lose weight, you could cut your arm off, but obviously that wouldn't make your life better. So the goal can't be to have less pounds, but it's also true, on the other hand, that having less pounds or less bulk or less of you is often a good thing for your health. So I just would caution to say that the goal is better health, and that often includes weight loss.
That's a great caution, because I feel like sometimes people want to lose weight, and they do, but then they gain it back again. And there's this yo-yo thing that goes on. Maybe it's because they're focused on the numbers and not on their health.
Right. The focus should be on how do I get healthier? As I say, sometimes, obviously, that includes having less weight. But to see them as mutually exclusive is not a good strategy for long-term success. So the thing that I've had the most success with quote, weight loss is the same thing that I've had the most success with in just having people become healthier, which is basically to eat a healthy, balanced diet and to move more. So if you do those two things, you're likely to get healthier, and you're also likely to have less weight, particularly if you start out being overweight. But interestingly, if you start out being underweight, you'll often gain weight, which is a good thing if you start out underweight. The issue here is, of course, the devil is in the details. So what does one mean, or what do I mean by eat a healthy, balanced diet? And what sort of movement are we talking about? Mm-hmm. So that's where the rubber hits the road, because everybody agrees that people should eat a healthy, balanced diet, and everybody probably doesn't agree on what exactly that means.
Can you get into the details then? Tell us, what does a balanced diet look like from your perspective?
The first thing about balance is you're talking about so-called macronutrients, which the good thing about macronutrients, or large nutrients is what that means, is that there's only 3 of them, so it's pretty easy to remember. And that's opposed to micronutrients where there's probably hundreds, if not thousands, if not more than that. But macronutrients are three. They're fats, proteins, and carbohydrates. And it's the balance of those that has a lot to do, A, with overall health, but B, specifically with weight gain or loss. And the reason for that is weight gain or loss, it's a little simplistic, but the best way to understand it is fundamentally controlled by the balance of two hormones, that is insulin and glucagon. Because insulin is the signal for your body to store fat, and glucagon is its antagonist, which is your body's signal to break down the fat. So if you have a predominance of insulin over glucagon, you will essentially store more fat than you break down. In other words, you'll get fat, which is not probably the nicest way to say it, but that's what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. You'll gain weight. The question is, what macronutrient balance promotes the least amount of insulin or the best balance of glucagon and insulin? And for that, you need a little physiology, which basically tells you that these three nutrients, fats, proteins, and carbohydrates, the first two have very little, if anything, to do with insulin. So in other words, if you eat lots of fat and lots of protein, besides the little caveat that there's a little bit of sugar synthesis from excess protein, but that doesn't have much to do with this situation. Mm-hmm. So essentially eating fats and proteins goes into building your body and helping hormone synthesis and essentially immune function, and has very little to do with controlling the insulin. In distinction to that, carbohydrates have everything to do with controlling insulin. So specifically what I mean by a balanced diet is a person eats the amount of fats and proteins they need to run their body and make proteins and help structural and immune system and hormonal balance. And then they use carbohydrate consumption to fuel exercise. So the easiest way I describe this is if you are a marathon runner and therefore you do a lot of movement or exercise, you usually will need to eat a fair amount of carbohydrates, let's say 300 grams a day, in order to fuel that activity. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, if you sit on the couch all day, you still need the same amount of proteins and fats, but you need a lot less carbohydrates, say 60, in order to fuel the movement which you're doing, which is basically none. Either of those two are balanced diets. So a 300-gram adequate protein and fat diet for a marathon runner is balanced, and a 60-gram carbohydrate adequate protein and fat is balanced for a couch potato. The problem is if you eat 300 grams of carbohydrates and adequate proteins and fats and sit on the couch, you end up with 240 grams of carbohydrates that won't be used for exercise or activity or movement. And so your body has to make insulin in order to store those extra carbohydrates as fat, which is what it will do. The body thinks that's basically a good thing because, you know, you've now stored up fat for the winter. But if the winter never comes and you do that 240 gram excess for your entire life, you can be usually pretty assured that you'll end up being overweight and probably even eventually type 2 diabetic. That, in a nutshell, is the issue with weight gain and why it also has to do with being healthy, because there's nothing much good about being a type 2 diabetic.
And I think the public is getting the idea on this because there's this whole movement to eat very low carb. Do you think this is the reason why?
Yes. I mean, there's other health benefits that are associated with that. Too much insulin, also called hyperinsulinemia, is what we call also metabolic syndrome. And too much insulin is probably the single most important reason for having chronic inflammation in your tissues. So this becomes a sort of lead-in to a whole lot of other metabolic abnormalities. It even has to do with cancer situation because too much insulin and too much inflammation leads, we think, to cancer. People call Alzheimer's disease type 3 diabetes, which means it's from chronic excess carbohydrate consumption and chronic hyperinsulinemia. So this is a huge issue. And the only thing I would disagree or correct a little bit of what you were implying is I'm not sure that I want people to have necessarily ultra low carbohydrate diets, except in certain situations maybe. What I'm advocating for is a balanced diet, just like everybody. But my concept of balance is the carbohydrates should be tied to activity. Now, if you want to lose weight, you want to even lower the insulin and stimulate the glucagon, which means you have to lower the carbohydrate intake a little bit lower than your activity. Now, in practice, that turns out to be a low carbohydrate diet. So it's in sense, at the end of the day, we both agree with a low carbohydrate diet, but I call it a balanced diet because if you're never getting off the couch, you really only need 60 grams of carbohydrates. That's a balanced diet. It is a low carbohydrate diet, but that wasn't the point. The point was just to balance the metabolism.
I hear what you're saying. And I think there are also dangers that come with eating too few carbohydrates. I read this book one time called Life Without Bread, and it said that it could affect your heart health. And indeed, personally, when I drastically reduced my intake of carbs, particularly grain-based breads and things like that, my heart started skipping a beat. And I said to the doctor, the cardiologist, when I saw him, I said, do you think it has anything to do with my diet? And he said, no. But when I changed and upped my carb intake again, it stopped doing that.
Right, which is sort of my point. Generally speaking, except in extreme situations, or not extreme, but unusual situations, there's no need or even a benefit, I don't think, from lowering your carbohydrate intake unnecessarily. Carbohydrates are a valid nutrient. So lowering it for somebody like you who doesn't necessarily need to, as you found out, isn't a balanced diet. And so it can actually lead to adverse consequences. So I'm not saying that. I'm just saying lower the carbohydrate based on your movement level, maybe a little bit lower, and then you can also do what's called intermittent fasting, which I can talk about if you want, and that will also stimulate the weight loss. But those are the two things that you generally need in order to have a healthy weight reduction, which what I mean is get healthier and also lose weight, not just lose weight.
Coming up, Tom talks to us about the importance of intermittent fasting and really just how to approach it. We want to pause now and recognize our sponsors, the Weston A. Price Foundation. Are you confused about nutrition? The Weston A. Price Foundation sets the record straight. Find out why butter is a health food, why soy foods are not your friend, and why optimal health is found in the wise food traditions of our ancestors. Visit westonaprice.org. And listeners like you. Cher Huff had this to say on Apple Podcasts. So very thankful for this podcast and everyone involved in bringing this life-saving information to the public. I am raising my son on a whole food, nutrient-dense way of life. I love knowing the facts behind it all. And the title of her review on Apple Podcasts was Gratitude. Honestly, Cher Huff, we are thankful for your kind words and for every review and share that all of you give this show. So thanks for your support and keep on listening. I did want to ask you about intermittent fasting because I have heard that that's not a good idea for weight loss, but you're saying it's helpful. Please explain.
Well, I've seen a lot of people who it does work for, and I wouldn't say it works for everybody. Sometimes with women, you have to do a little bit of a modification. But again, the theory is simple, which is that we all have approximately 12 hours of sugar, either in the form of the food we eat or glycogen, which is not glucagon, even though they sound the same. Glycogen is the storage form of starch in your liver. So if you stop eating at, say, 6 p.m. at night, by 6 a.m. the next morning, you'll have run out of the food that you eat and the stored, easily accessible starch in your liver. At that point, you have to switch your hormone balance from a insulin-based one to a glucagon-based one, because in order to keep your blood sugar stable, you have to break down your own fat. So essentially, your fast starts at 12 hours after you stopped eating. So that's time zero. So anytime you go at more than 12 hours, say if you go 13 or 18 hours without eating, during those last 1 to 6 hours, you will be breaking down and utilizing your fat to keep the blood sugar stable. And so that's essentially how people lose weight. You can prolong it if you want, and then it becomes maybe not so much an intermittent fast as just a fast. But I tend not to like to do that. I tend to have people start at 13 hours, which means 1 hour of fasting, and then work up to 18 hours and do that anywhere from 2 to 6 days a week, which creates a kind of slow loss of weight and also a slow increase in health. And usually energy and sleep better, bowels are better, a lot of things get better. In other words, you get healthier. And that fasting time stimulates the breakdown of your own fat tissue, which then helps you lose weight.
I like this version of fasting because it includes the time you're sleeping, which makes it easier to manage, especially when you're just getting started, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's very easy. And the one caveat I would say if anybody wants to try it is, so you stop eating, which is what I do pretty much every night at 6. So no food, only water after 6. You do that for about a week and it becomes very easy. You don't even think about food anymore. So then you sleep better and you wake up better. And then comes the key, which is you have two choices. One is to sit around and look at the refrigerator, and the other is to get out and do something, particularly move your body, whether it's exercise or gardening or raking or cleaning gutters or shoveling snow if you live in one of those places, or going for a swim or something like that. If you do that, I can pretty much guarantee that within a week of doing that, you will not think about food and you will easily get to 18 hours. And then you have, a normal nourishing traditions, good fat, modest protein, lots of vegetables, lowish carbohydrate. If you want a ballpark, I would shoot for 30 grams of carbs at each meal. So you're going to have 2 meals, one around usual traditional lunch and one at 5:30. And that's usually all the food anybody needs. That's a balanced, i.e. lowish carbohydrate regimen, if you want to use that word. And that fasting part is very easy. The only thing I would say, again, is just don't sit around looking at the refrigerator because that makes it really hard to do it.
And when you talk about activity, talk to us a little bit. I remember reading somewhere about how you've upped your activity level and how good that feels. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Humans are meant to move, and humans are not meant to sit around all day. The other thing that helps is to have stronger muscles, because the stronger your muscles are, the more they actually take up the excess carbohydrates instead of relying on insulin to deal with the excess carbohydrates. So anything you can do to have stronger muscles will help with this getting healthier weight loss project. So the way to get healthier muscles is what's called strength training, which means to put your muscles in a situation where they're doing something that they're not used to doing, and then they usually get stronger in order to accommodate. So if you do that a few times a week, along with doing other kinds of stretching and walking and running up hills sometimes, or gardening, or whatever other kind of normal human activities, the more the better. That has so many benefits, psychological, emotional, strength-wise, insulin-wise, weight loss-wise, immune system-wise. And, I don't mean to prescribe what somebody should do, but it should be something that makes you stronger and that you enjoy.
But in the moment when you're trying to do that 6th push-up or 20th push-up, that's not always enjoyable, right? I mean, that's hard. That's when you're like,
Right. That takes some interest in self-improvement, I guess you would call it. But I think, generally speaking, it's worth it. I don't think people should necessarily overdo it. We don't all want to be weightlifters or muscle men, but pushing yourself a little bit is, generally speaking, a good thing. It helps your body get stronger. The stronger you are, the harder you are to kill. the better your immune system functions, so you're more resistant to infections or whatever, whatever would kill you.
We do want to be like that lean, mean fighting machine against infection or disease or what have you.
Yeah, I don't know that I like the lean, mean fighting machine because you can overdo it. And I don't think the goal is to be as lean as possible. In fact, there's probably some good things about having some layer of fat. I think that it actually has some benefits. I don't want to leave the impression that at the end of the day, the skinniest person wins. And everybody also has to find the weight that they feel the best and function the best. And there's usually a range of probably 5 to 10 pounds for everybody. And it may not be the leanest you could be. So I don't necessarily mean that, but I mean where you function best, feel the best, think the best, sleep the best, everything works the best for you.
Our goal, as you said earlier, is really to be the healthiest we can be, not necessarily the slimmest we can be.
And they're different. Healthy and slim are not the same things, but neither is healthy and obese. Those are not the same things either. One of the things I often point out about the situation in America, if you ever have a chance to watch a movie of a famous comedian named Jackie Gleason, I don't know if you know that name. He, for instance, played a famous pool shark named Fats Domino. And of course, Fats Domino was called Fats because he was so fat. And Jackie Gleason, back when I was growing up in the 70s, was the fat comedian. He was the fat guy. If you see a picture of Jackie Gleason now, you would think, he's a little overweight. If you put him in Houston, Texas, not to degrade Houston, Texas at all, but I would say he would be in the lowest 25% of 50-year-old men as far as weight.
Wow.
So it's a very interesting comment. This guy who his whole career was essentially based on being the fat guy. And so he got all the fat guy roles in the movies. Really, go and watch an old Jackie Gleason. He was a nimble, he was a very good dancer, and he was slightly overweight, we would call him now. He's nothing like if you go to the airports and just watch people, bus stations, downtown. He's in the lowest percentages of 50-year-old Americans.
Wow. And it's due to the fact of what you said earlier, where we are eating more carbs and we're moving less. And so everything's out of balance.
Well, we were convinced in the 60s, basically by the doctors and the American Heart Association, that fat is bad for you. I've often remarked, I'll have patients who go to a cardiologist and then they come to me and they show me their lipid profile of their cholesterol and triglycerides. And the cardiologist has written a note on their chart or in their actual lab test saying, you have high cholesterol and high triglycerides. You need to go on a low-fat, low-carbohydrate diet. So what that tells me is whoever wrote that note has never probably cooked a meal in their life. I'm sure they've eaten some, but they have no idea of food. They may have some idea of numbers on a chart or something, but they don't have any idea of food because there is no diet that's a low-carbohydrate, low-fat food. Like that food doesn't exist as a diet. So people generally have to choose, either eat low-fat or low-carb or modest of both. But you can't tell somebody to eat low-fat and not expect that they're going to have to eat more carbohydrates. Because that's the only choice you have. You can't eat lean protein all day. There is no food like that. Or if there is, nobody would eat it. So when they told us heart disease, et cetera, all those diseases are caused by high fat, they essentially told us to eat more carbohydrates. So everybody did. And so they ate lots and lots of carbohydrates, which interestingly don't have the shutoff signal to tell you you've overeaten. So whereas fat is very hard to overeat fat. And if you don't believe me, just try to eat a stick of butter and halfway through you'll say, you know what, I think I've had enough. But you can eat much more than that carbohydrates. You can eat a whole box of Kellogg's cornflakes, no problem, because there's no shutoff system. So basically people charged ahead, ate as low fat as they could, as high a carbohydrate as they could, trying to make up the difference. and they ended up obese and sick. And that's what happened. And so Jackie Gleason, he's the canary in the coal mine, so to speak.
I do believe you're right. I do believe that we've been misled, and now we're trying to turn things around. And I'm thankful for conversations like this one that can point people in the right direction. Is there anything as we start to close that you'd like to tell the listener? What's one thing you would recommend, maybe related to what we've been discussing, that you would suggest that the listener do to improve their health?
Mostly listen to your body and not experts, which actually probably includes me. People need to have a healthy dose of skepticism about everything they're being told on all levels, from the sort of mainstream culture, popular press, establishment, institutions. Without that, it's very easy to be led astray.
Excellent advice. Thank you so much, Tom. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
Okay, thank you.
My guest today was Dr. Tom Cowan. To connect with Tom, go to his website, fourfoldhealing.com. That's the word for, F-O-U-R, fold as in folding the laundry, and healing, all one word, .com, fourfoldhealing.com. For an overview of today's discussion and links to resources we mentioned on the show, go to westinaprice.org, click on the tab for blogs and podcasts, and find the show notes for episode 112. Hey, and a big thanks to my friends at Podcast Village. Charlie Burney, Oscar Santana, Rob Ford, Joe Ennis. You guys are pros at what you do. You have to check them out for training, producing, and promoting podcasts. They're the best. Go to podcastvillage.com. Special thanks today to editor and producer Rob Ford and the team of interns who keep the show going strong. Cynthia Castro Cohen Enriquez, Joy de los Santos, Elisa Canty, and Lily Hemft. Thanks also to Amy Marvin for her help transcribing episodes. Hey, and don't forget to look for me at Holistic Hilda on Twitter, at Holistic_Hilda on Instagram, and visit my website, holistichilda.com, to find out where I will be in 2018. I would love to connect with you, either virtually or in person. So thanks so much, and keep on listening.
Have you been enjoying these podcasts? Have you benefited from them or from the resources on the website or local chapter meetings? If so, please become a member of the Weston A. Price Foundation. It's only $25 for students and seniors and $40 for a general membership. Your contribution is critical for the continued work of the foundation. Wise Traditions is brought to you by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. The content of this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for medical advice.